Imagine a world on this precipice, a dark shadow stretching across Europe. It's 1940. The Nazi war machine is seemingly invincible, having swept through nations with terrifying speed and precision. In Berlin, the marbled halls of the Reich chancellery hum with the quiet confidence of conquest. Then, a document arrives, a translated transcript of a speech by American President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He speaks of a goal, an audacious ambition, 185,000 aircraft in 2 years. Silence. Then, a booming laugh shatters the air. It's Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, Hitler's designated successor, a man infamous for his vanity and his utter certainty in German military and industrial supremacy. He waves the paper, dismissing it with a flourish. "The Americans are desperate," he bellows, his words echoing off the polished stone. In 1939, their entire annual production was less than 3,000 planes. "This is nothing but crude propaganda to frighten us." General Ernst Udet, the Luftwaffe's Director General of Equipment, a celebrated World War I ace now responsible for Germany's aerial might, nods in agreement, adding his own contemptuous assessment. "Even if they tried, Herr Reichsmarschall, the Americans make automobiles, not aircraft. A Ford is not a Focke-Wulf. They could perhaps manage 10,000 planes a year if they destroyed their entire consumer economy, but 185,000? It's absurd." And Hitler himself, after listening to his trusted advisors, dismissed Roosevelt's numbers with characteristic arrogance. "Typical American boasting," he sneered, "like their skyscrapers and their Hollywood films, all show and no substance." This wasn't just a simple miscalculation. This was a catastrophic intelligence failure, born of deeply ingrained prejudice, ideological blindness, and a profound underestimation of a rival's fundamental strengths. What they dismissed as impossible, as mere propaganda, would ultimately become the very engine of their destruction. By the war's end, American factories would produce not 185,000 aircraft, but over 300,000, a staggering 115,000 more than even Roosevelt's seemingly outlandish target. The German generals who mocked those numbers would watch helplessly as thousand-bomber raids darkened their skies, as American fighters swept the Luftwaffe from the air, and as transport aircraft supplied Allied armies across the globe with a freedom of movement that made blitzkrieg look primitive by comparison. But how could such an intelligent, sophisticated military and industrial power get it so wrong? The roots of this miscalculation ran deep, interwoven with German military thinking, cultural biases, and a fundamental misunderstanding of American capitalism and its unique brand of industrial prowess. General der Flieger Helmut Felmy, commander of Luftflotte II, had actually visited American aircraft factories in 1938 as part of a military exchange program. His report to the Luftwaffe High Command was utterly dismissive. He observed, "The Americans build aircraft like they build automobiles, prioritizing quantity over quality. Their workers lack the precision and craftsmanship of German aviation workers. They may produce many planes, but they will be inferior machines flown by inferior pilots." This assessment, dripping with an almost aristocratic disdain for American mass production, was further reinforced by Colonel Theodor Rohohl, who headed the Luftwaffe's Strategic Reconnaissance Unit. He reported that American aircraft designs were conservative and uninspired, suitable perhaps for mail delivery, but not for modern warfare. Their conclusions were based on a specific, narrow definition of quality, one rooted in bespoke craftsmanship, meticulous individual attention, and a perception of engineering as an art form rather than a system. They admired the intricate, hand-built engines and finely tuned airframes that emerged from their own factories, believing these to be the pinnacle of aviation. They failed to grasp that the American approach, while perhaps lacking some of that artisanal flair, prioritized robustness, ease of manufacture, and crucially, scalability. They saw individual trees while missing the vast, interconnected forest of America's industrial ecosystem. This blindness wasn't unique to Germany. It was a pervasive delusion across the Axis powers. The Japanese military leadership, in particular, shared and even exceeded German skepticism about American aircraft production. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, was perhaps the only senior Axis leader with a genuine understanding of American industrial capacity, having studied at Harvard and served as a naval attaché in Washington. He knew the sleeping giant he was about to awaken. He warned his imperial general staff, presenting estimates that America could potentially produce 100,000 aircraft annually by 1943. His warnings were not just dismissed. They were met with accusations of defeatism. General Hideki Tojo, future Prime Minister of Japan, famously declared at a staff meeting in early 1941, "The Americans are merchants, not warriors. They may count their planes, but can they count pilots willing to die for their country? One Japanese pilot is worth 10 American planes." This sentiment perfectly encapsulates the hubris of the Axis. They conflated industrial capacity with spiritual resolve, economic strength with moral weakness. They believed that their samurai spirit, their willingness to sacrifice, could somehow overcome an avalanche of material. General Masaharu Homma, who would later conquer the Philippines, added to this chorus, claiming American workers were soft and pampered, incapable of the sustained effort required for war production. They will strike for higher wages while we strike for victory. This was a profound misjudgment of the American character and the unique dynamics of a free society mobilized for war. Italian assessments, perhaps the most detached from reality, mirrored this dangerous blend of arrogance and ignorance. Marshal Italo Balbo, the celebrated aviator who governed Libya, had actually witnessed American aviation capability firsthand during his famous 1933 transatlantic flight to Chicago. He had seen the nascent industrial power. Yet, even he assured Mussolini that American aircraft production was all show, designed to impress at air shows but lacking the robust qualities needed for combat. General Francesco Priccolo, chief of staff of the Regia Aeronautica, reported to Mussolini in 1940 that American aircraft are built for comfort, not combat. They have heaters and cushioned seats while our pilots fly with warrior spirit. Even if they could build 50,000 planes, which is doubtful, they would be flying luxury cars, not weapons of war. This idea of comfort versus warrior spirit is a recurring theme. It reflects a fundamental cultural clash. The Axis powers saw comfort as a sign of decadence, a weakness that would crumble under the harsh realities of war. The Americans, however, viewed comfort and ergonomics not as luxuries, but as elements that improved pilot efficiency, reduced fatigue, and ultimately enhanced combat effectiveness. A comfortable pilot is a more alert, more effective pilot. They were not building luxury cars. They were building resilient, practical tools of war, designed for sustained operations over vast distances, flown by well-supported crews. The first reality check for the Germans, however, came from an unexpected source, their own Luftwaffe pilots during the Battle of Britain. In late 1940, these pilots, who had until then dominated the skies, began encountering American-built aircraft in Royal Air Force colors. The Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk, dismissed by German intelligence as an obsolete design, proved surprisingly effective in the hands of RAF pilots. More disturbing were reports of the sheer numbers arriving in Britain. Hauptmann Walter Adolf, an Bf 109 pilot with Jagdgeschwader 26, wrote in his diary, The British seem to have unlimited American planes. We shoot down 3 and 5 appear the next day. Where are they getting them all? These initial observations were dismissed by Luftwaffe High Command as exaggeration, the grumblings of tired men seeking excuses for their failure to defeat the RAF. Göring personally accused pilots of defeatism, refusing to believe that American production could be significant so early in the war. The psychological barrier to accepting contradictory evidence was incredibly strong. To admit American industrial power was to undermine the very foundation of their ideological superiority. By early 1941, German intelligence was receiving more concrete information about American aircraft production. But the numbers seemed so fantastic that they were dismissed as Allied disinformation. An Abwehr report from a source in the still neutral United States claimed that the Douglas Aircraft Company alone was producing 300 aircraft per month. General Hans Jaschonek, Luftwaffe Chief of Staff, marked the report with a single word: impossible. He calculated that such production would require a workforce of 50,000 people working in facilities covering millions of square feet, which he deemed beyond American organizational capability. This reveals another blind spot: the underestimation of American organizational genius, of its unique ability to rapidly scale operations and adapt existing industrial infrastructure. When similar reports came from other sources, including German businessmen in America and neutral Swedish observers, they were simply filed away as examples of Allied psychological warfare. The pattern was clear. If the intelligence didn't fit the preconceived narrative, it was automatically deemed false. This is a crucial lesson in critical thinking, not just in warfare, but in any field. The greatest risks often lie in dismissing inconvenient truths. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 initially reinforced this Axis dismissal of American aircraft production potential. German military observers noted with satisfaction that the Americans had lost numerous aircraft on the ground, suggesting poor readiness and organization. General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations for the Wehrmacht, told his staff that the Americans will now need every plane they can build just to defend their own territory. The idea of them supplying aircraft to Britain and Russia while fighting Japan is fantasy. He estimated that America might manage to produce 15,000 aircraft in 1942 if they made it their absolute priority. But this would come at the cost of all other military production. The reality, however, was already far exceeding German estimates. By January 1942, American aircraft factories were operating on 3 shifts, 7 days a week. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant, which German intelligence had dismissed as a propaganda showpiece, was implementing assembly line production for B-24 Liberator bombers. This was something German aviation experts considered utterly impossible. Wilhelm Messerschmitt himself, Germany's premier aircraft designer, had stated categorically that heavy bombers cannot be mass-produced like automobiles. Each one requires individual attention and craftsmanship. Yet, Willow Run was approaching a production rate of 1 B-24 every 63 minutes, faster than Germany could produce simple training aircraft. This wasn't just an engineering feat. It was a revolution in industrial methodology. It highlighted the fundamental difference in approach. Germany focused on perfecting a single, exquisite machine. America focused on perfecting the system that built countless robust machines. The first undeniable, widespread evidence of American aircraft production reached German commanders through their U-boat fleet. In early 1942, submarines operating off the American coast began reporting massive aerial patrols by aircraft types they couldn't identify. Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigan of U-123 signaled, "Constant air patrol by twin-engine aircraft, possibly hundreds of them, cannot surface during daylight." Admiral Karl Dönitz, the U-boat commander, initially suspected his captains were exaggerating. But when similar reports flooded in from every submarine in American waters, he was forced to acknowledge that America had somehow produced vast numbers of patrol aircraft almost overnight. What he didn't know was that these were just training flights. The real production was already being shipped to combat theaters, often traversing the Atlantic under the very noses of his U-boats. Luftwaffe commanders in North Africa provided the next reality check. In late 1942, as American forces joined the fighting, German pilots were shocked by the sudden appearance of hundreds of American aircraft types they had never seen before. The P-38 Lightning, with its distinctive twin-boom design, appeared in such numbers that German intelligence couldn't explain their presence. Major Eduard Neumann, commanding Jagdgeschwader 27, reported to Berlin, "The Americans seem to have unlimited aircraft. We destroy 10 and 30 appear. Either our intelligence has completely failed or the Americans have achieved production miracles." His report, revealing the grim truth, was quickly censored by the Luftwaffe High Command, who feared its defeatist tone would affect morale. This self-censorship, suppressing truth for the sake of a false narrative, is another tragic hallmark of authoritarian regimes. The African campaign revealed another disturbing fact. American aircraft were not the inferior machines German experts had predicted. The P-47 Thunderbolt, initially mocked by German pilots as the Jug for its ungainly appearance, proved to be a formidable fighter bomber. Its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy an Bf-109, while its .850 caliber machine guns provided devastating firepower. Even more impressive was the apparently unlimited supply of spare parts and replacement aircraft. Luftwaffe mechanics reported capturing American air bases with enough spare parts to rebuild entire squadrons, while German units were cannibalizing damaged aircraft just to keep a handful flying. This was the logistical dimension of industrial might, not just producing the machines, but sustaining them in combat. Japanese naval commanders were experiencing similar shocks in the Pacific. After the Battle of Midway in June 1942, where Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, Admiral Matome Ugaki, Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet, calculated that Japan could replace these losses in perhaps 3 years. Intelligence reports suggesting that America had laid down the keels for 17 fleet carriers and 50 escort carriers were dismissed as impossible and obvious propaganda. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who would later create the Kamikaze Corps, stated flatly, "The Americans are lying to demoralize us. No nation could build that many carriers while also fighting a war." Yet, by 1944, America had over 100 carriers of all types, while Japan had managed to complete just 6. The sheer scale of American industrial mobilization was simply beyond their comprehension. By early 1943, German commanders on all fronts were reporting encounters with American aircraft in numbers that defied their pre-war calculations. On the Eastern Front, Soviet pilots were flying American P-39 Airacobras and P-40 Warhawks delivered through Lend-Lease. In the Mediterranean, American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators were appearing in formations of hundreds. In the Atlantic, American-built patrol bombers and escort carriers were closing the Black Pit, where U-boats had operated freely. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, commanding German fighter defenses, sent an urgent report to Göring. "The Americans are producing aircraft at a rate we cannot match or even properly estimate. We are being overwhelmed by numbers." Göring's response revealed the depth of German self-delusion. He accused Galland of defeatism and demanded that German pilots simply fight harder. When Galland presented photographic evidence of American bomber formations containing 500 aircraft, Göring claimed the photographs were fabricated. It wasn't until Göring himself witnessed a 1,000-bomber raid over Berlin in March 1944 that he finally accepted the reality. Turning to his aide, he reportedly said, "We have lost the war. I was wrong about American production. They can build aircraft like sausages." The revelation was particularly bitter for German aviation experts who had prided themselves on their technical superiority. Professor Willy Messerschmitt, whose name adorned some of the most advanced fighters of the era, visited a crashed B-17 and was stunned by what he found. The aircraft was not a masterpiece of exquisite engineering in the German style, but rather a triumph of production efficiency. Parts were standardized and interchangeable. Systems were robust rather than overly refined, and everything was designed for mass production. He told his engineering team, "The Americans have not built a better aircraft. They have built a system for producing unlimited aircraft. We have been fighting the last war while they invented a new one." This quote encapsulates the strategic shift that Germany failed to grasp. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, a brilliant organizer himself, tried desperately to match American production by implementing similar mass production techniques in German factories. But he discovered that American methods required more than just assembly lines. They required a complete industrial ecosystem that Germany had never developed. American factories used specialized machine tools that didn't exist in Germany, employed quality control methods that German craftsmen resisted, and relied on a workforce that included women and minorities that Nazi ideology rejected. Speer's report to Hitler in late 1943 was stark. "The Americans are producing aircraft at 5 times our rate. By next year, it will be 10 times. We cannot compete." This was a concession of monumental strategic defeat, admitting that the industrial war was lost. The psychological impact on German pilots was devastating. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who had scored 206 aerial victories, wrote before his death in October 1943, "We take off with 4 fighters against 400 bombers and 40 fighters. We shoot down 10, lose 2 of our own, and consider it a victory. But tomorrow they come back with the same numbers while we have 2 fewer fighters. We are not being defeated, we are being erased." And his wingman, Feldwebel Georg Schutt, added his own chilling observation. "The Americans must have factories that stretch to the horizon. Every bomber we destroy is replaced by 3. Every fighter we shoot down is replaced by 5. They are not fighting a war, they are conducting an industrial execution." These aren't just statistics. These are the heart-wrenching cries of men pushed to their absolute limits, facing an enemy that simply would not, could not, run out of resources. Japanese pilots were experiencing the same overwhelming reality. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading surviving ace, described encountering American aircraft over the Philippines in 1944. The sky was black with American planes. Hundreds of fighters, hundreds of bombers flying in perfect formation. We had 12 Zeros to attack them. It was not combat. It was suicide. We could not even reach the bombers through the screen of fighters. He pondered. Where had all these planes come from? Our intelligence had told us America was building ships, not aircraft. They had built both in numbers that mocked our efforts. The Marianas Turkey Shoot of June 1944 provided the most dramatic demonstration of American aircraft production superiority. Japan had spent 2 years rebuilding its carrier aviation after Midway, training pilots who represented the last reservoir of Japanese experience. In a single day, American fighters and anti-aircraft fire destroyed 645 Japanese aircraft, while losing only 123. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the Japanese carrier force, sent a bitter message to Tokyo. The enemy has achieved not just quantitative, but qualitative superiority. They have so many aircraft that they can afford to use inexperienced pilots and still overwhelm us. We are fighting not an air force, but an air armada. The realization was absolute, total, and heartbreaking for the Japanese. Italian commanders, watching the destruction of the Luftwaffe over their homeland, drew their own grim conclusions. General Rino Corso Fuggier, commander of the Regia Aeronautica, told Mussolini in 1943, "The Americans have made our calculations meaningless. We estimated they might produce 20,000 aircraft per year. They are producing that many every 2 months. We have 500 fighters to defend Italy. They can send 500 bombers with 500 fighters as escort. And if we destroy them all, they will send 500 more tomorrow. This is not war. It is industrial annihilation." The numbers that were finally confirmed by intelligence were staggering. In 1939, America had produced 2,195 military aircraft. In 1940, even before entering the war, production rose to 6,068. Then came the explosion. 19,004 in 1941, 47,036 in 1942, 85,098 in 1943, in 1944, and 46,011 in 1945 before the war's end. The final tally was an astonishing 303,016 military aircraft, not counting civilian aircraft converted to military use. To put this in perspective, Germany produced approximately 119,000 aircraft during the entire war. Japan produced 70,000, and Italy managed only 11,000. America had outproduced all Axis powers combined by a factor of 2, but the numbers tell only part of the story. American aircraft production included types and capabilities that Axis powers hadn't imagined possible. The B-29 Superfortress, which began bombing Japan in 1944, was a technological marvel that no other nation could have produced during wartime. It cost more to develop than the atomic bomb. Yet, America built 3,970 of them. Each B-29 had 55,000 manufactured parts, 8 miles of wiring, and sophisticated systems, including pressurized crew compartments, centralized fire control, and the most powerful aircraft engines ever built. German engineers studying captured B-29 technical manuals concluded it would have taken Germany 20 years to develop and produce such an aircraft. The efficiency of American production was equally stunning. By 1944, the average American aircraft worker was producing 3 times the weight of airframe per month as their German counterpart, despite working fewer hours. American factories had perfected techniques that German engineers considered impossible. Welding aluminum, Germans used rivets exclusively. Mass-producing turbo superchargers, Germans hand-built them. And manufacturing reliable electrical systems, a chronic German weakness. The Packard Motor Company was mass-producing Rolls-Royce Merlin engines under license, achieving better quality control than Rolls-Royce itself, something German engineers declared theoretically impossible. This was the quiet triumph of American pragmatism over German adherence to traditional methods. German attempts to counter American aircraft production through technological superiority failed catastrophically. The Me-262 jet fighter, which Göring hoped would sweep American bombers from the sky, was indeed superior to any Allied fighter. But Germany managed to produce only 1,400 Me-262s and never had more than 200 operational at any time. Meanwhile, America was producing 200 P-51 Mustangs every 3 days. General der Jagdflieger Gordon Golob calculated that even if every Me-262 shot down 10 American aircraft before being destroyed, Germany would still be overwhelmed by numbers. The mathematics of attrition were inexorable. Perfection in small numbers simply cannot stand against good enough in overwhelming numbers. The German V-weapons program represented another attempt to counter American production through technology. The V-1 flying bomb and V-2 rocket were meant to destroy American bomber bases in England. But while Germany was producing these complex weapons at enormous cost, America was simply building more airfields. By 1944, there were so many American air bases in England that the country was described as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Even if German V-weapons had been 10 times more effective, they couldn't have stopped the tide of American aircraft. It was a futile effort, like trying to stop a tsunami with a sandcastle. Japanese attempts to counter American aircraft production were even more desperate. The kamikaze campaign was born from the recognition that Japan could no longer match American aircraft production in either quantity or quality. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who created the special attack units, explained the logic with brutal honesty. We cannot build enough aircraft or train enough pilots to fight conventionally, but we can make every plane and pilot a guided missile. Yet, even this desperate expedient failed. America lost 763 aircraft to kamikaze attacks, but replaced them within weeks. Japan lost 3,860 aircraft and pilots in kamikaze attacks, losses that were irreplaceable. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was a societal self-immolation. The disparity in training revealed another dimension of American production superiority. While Germany and Japan were rushing partially trained pilots into combat, America was using its vast aircraft production to maintain extensive training programs. American pilots arrived in combat with 400 hours of flight time. German pilots in 1944 had less than 100 hours. Japanese pilots often less than 50. America could afford to use thousands of aircraft just for training, while Axis powers needed every plane for combat. Lieutenant General Adolf Galland later observed, "The Americans produced not just more planes, but more pilots, better trained with unlimited fuel for training. We were sending children to fight veterans." This wasn't a fair fight. It was a slaughter of the inexperienced. Captured German pilots provided vivid testimony about facing American aircraft production. Major George Peter Ader, who survived being shot down 17 times, described the evolution of American air power. In 1943, we could still fight them. The formations were smaller, the escorts fewer. By 1944, the sky was black with American planes. You couldn't even see individual aircraft, just a dark cloud moving across the sky. We would climb to attack and find ourselves facing hundreds of fighters. It was like attacking a swarm of locusts with a fly swatter. The impact on German morale was catastrophic. Luftwaffe pilot letters home revealed deepening despair. Unteroffizier Stefan Litz wrote to his wife in March 1944, "The Americans come every day now. Yesterday it was 800 bombers. Today it was 1,000. Tomorrow it will be more. We have 12 fighters left in our entire group. We take off knowing we will not return. The Americans have so many planes they use them for practice. We are not fighting anymore. We are just dying in sequence." This wasn't just losing a war. It was witnessing the physical, tangible erasure of their entire air force, one suicide mission at a time. German civilians experienced the reality of American aircraft production in the most direct way possible, through devastating bombing raids. Hamburg, Berlin, Dresden, and dozens of other cities were reduced to rubble by armadas of American bombers that seemed limitless. Margaret Eckhardt, a Berlin resident, wrote in her diary, "They say the Americans are weak, that they can only make refrigerators. But these refrigerator makers send 1,000 planes over our city. We shoot down 50 and they send 1,000 more the next day. Our leaders lied to us. The Americans have built more planes than we have bullets to shoot at them. The ultimate betrayal was not just losing the war, but realizing their leaders had fundamentally misled them about the enemy. Even more demoralizing were the American fighter escorts that accompanied the bombers. By early 1944, P-51 Mustangs were escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back, something German aviation experts had declared impossible. The psychological impact of seeing American fighters over the capital of the Reich was devastating. Hitler himself reportedly flew into a rage when told American fighters were strafing targets in Berlin, screaming at Göring, "You told me this was impossible. You said American production was propaganda. You have destroyed the Reich with your incompetence." The chickens had finally come home to roost, and the architect of the Luftwaffe's early triumphs was now exposed as the architect of its ultimate failure. The reconnaissance capabilities provided by American aircraft production created another form of superiority. By 1944, American photo-reconnaissance aircraft were photographing every square mile of German-occupied territory regularly. The Germans knew that Americans had complete intelligence on their military dispositions, industrial facilities, and transportation networks, but could do nothing about it. There were simply too many reconnaissance aircraft flying too high and too fast to intercept. General der Artillerie Erich Feldgiebel reported, "The Americans see everything. They photograph our positions in the morning and bomb them in the afternoon. We are fighting blind against an enemy with 1,000 eyes." This wasn't just a tactical disadvantage. It was a fundamental shift in the nature of battlefield awareness. Soviet commanders on the Eastern Front, while grateful for American Lend-Lease aircraft, were also stunned by the quantities involved. Marshal Georgy Zhukov later wrote, "The Americans sent us over 14,000 aircraft. These were not their best planes, but they were infinitely better than nothing. What amazed us was that these 14,000 aircraft represented less than 5% of American production. They could give away more aircraft than most nations could build and still have plenty for themselves." This speaks volumes about the sheer scale of the American war effort, a resource faucet that never seemed to turn off. The quality of American aircraft improved dramatically as production increased, contradicting German assumptions that mass production meant inferior quality. The P-51D Mustang, which entered service in 1944, was superior to any German piston-engine fighter in overall performance. It had been developed in just 117 days and was being produced at a rate of 20 per day. Meanwhile, Germany's advanced Ta-152, which might have matched the Mustang, saw only 43 produced. General der Jagdflieger Johannes Steinhoff observed, "We spent years perfecting the ultimate fighter and built dozens. The Americans spent months creating a good enough fighter and built thousands. Guess who won?" The logistical system supporting American aircraft production was equally impressive. By 1944, American forces were operating from hundreds of airfields worldwide, all supplied with fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and maintenance equipment. A damaged B-17 could land at any Allied airfield and find the parts and expertise to repair it. A damaged Bf-109 might be grounded for weeks waiting for a specific part from a factory that no longer existed. Luftwaffe, General der Flieger. Karl Koller reported, "The Americans have achieved something we thought impossible. A global air force with global logistics. They can project air power anywhere on Earth and sustain it indefinitely." German efforts to attack American aircraft production through sabotage and long-range bombing proved futile. Operation Eisenhammer, a planned Luftwaffe raid on Soviet power plants to disrupt aluminum production for American aircraft, never materialized due to lack of resources. The America Bomber Project, meant to develop an aircraft capable of bombing American factories, produced only prototypes. Meanwhile, American factories operated in complete safety, running 3 shifts under bright lights while German factories were bombed to rubble. Speer wrote in his diary, "The greatest advantage the Americans have is not their production, but their security. They build in peace while we build under bombs." This was the ultimate irony and the final nail in the coffin. The role of women in American aircraft production stunned Axis observers. By 1943, women constituted 65% of the workforce in many aircraft plants. German intelligence reports expressing disbelief that American housewives were building 4-engine bombers were dismissed as propaganda until captured aircraft were found to have inspection stamps with women's names. Luftwaffe. Colonel Hans Ulrich Rudel wrote, "We were told American women were weak and pampered, yet they built the bombers that destroyed our cities. What kind of nation can turn its women into aircraft builders overnight? We never understood what we were fighting." This was the ultimate failure of their ideological worldview, to understand the power of a free, motivated populace. The final phase of the air war demonstrated American production superiority in its darkest form. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, weather grounded Allied aircraft for days. When the weather cleared, American air forces flew 15,000 sorties in 3 days, dropping more bombs than the entire Luftwaffe possessed. German soldiers reported the sky was so full of American planes that they overlapped each other. General Major Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the Panzer Lehr Division, reported, "The Americans have so many aircraft that they use them like artillery. Every crossroads, every vehicle, every group of soldiers is attacked from the air. We cannot move. We cannot fight. We can only hide and die." Japanese commanders facing the B-29 offensive experienced similar despair. General Korochika Anami, war minister, reported to Emperor Hirohito, "The Americans are destroying our cities one by one with aircraft we cannot reach or stop. They have built a bomber, the B-29, that flies higher than our fighters can climb, farther than our fighters can fly, and carries more bombs than 20 of our bombers. They have hundreds of these impossible aircraft. We are not being defeated. We are being erased from the air." The very air they breathed was being dominated by a force they could neither comprehend nor resist. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were delivered by B-29s, representing the convergence of American production and technology. The Manhattan Project itself was a production miracle, but it was the ability to build specialized aircraft to deliver the weapons that made them effective. The Enola Gay and Bockscar were not just bombers, but flying laboratories modified with special equipment that no other nation could have produced during wartime. General Leslie Groves, director of the Manhattan Project, later observed, "We could build the bomb because we could build anything. The Germans had better scientists, but we had better factories." This pithy statement captures the essence of the industrial war. Post-war interrogations revealed the depth of Axis miscalculation. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel at Nuremberg admitted, "We based our entire strategy on the assumption that American aircraft production could not exceed 20,000 per year. When they produced 96,000 in 1944 alone, our defeat was certain. We were not defeated by better generals or braver soldiers, but by American factories." This is a profoundly humbling admission, stripping away the romanticized notions of military glory to expose the stark, brutal reality of industrial power. Hermann Göring, also at Nuremberg, was even more direct. "The American production figures we dismissed as propaganda were actually understatements. They could have claimed 400,000 aircraft and been telling the truth if they counted trainers and transports. We lost the war the day Roosevelt announced his production goals, and we laughed instead of listening. What a bitter, tragic irony. The man who started the laughter was forced to concede the ultimate truth. Japanese military leaders were equally frank. Admiral Soemu Toyoda told American interrogators, "We knew America was strong, but we thought strength meant battleships and tanks. We didn't understand that strength meant the ability to build unlimited aircraft." When we realized American factories were producing more aircraft in a month than Japan in a year, we knew the war was lost. The atomic bomb just ended what American aircraft production had already decided. Italian Marshal Pietro Badoglio, who had led Italy's surrender, offered his own perspective. Mussolini told us American workers were lazy and their democracy was weak. But these lazy workers in their weak democracy produced more aircraft than the entire world combined. We thought we were Romans rebuilding an empire. We were actually barbarians fighting the real empire, American industrial power. This redefines what empire truly meant in the 20th century. The German generals who survived the war and wrote memoirs invariably addressed their miscalculation about American aircraft production. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein wrote, "We prepared for every contingency except the possibility that our enemies could produce unlimited aircraft. We studied tactics, strategy, logistics, but we never studied industrial capacity. The American genius was not in how they fought, but in how they built. They buried us under an avalanche of aluminum and steel." General Heinz Guderian, the pioneer of armored warfare, reflected, "We revolutionized war with our tanks and dive bombers, but the Americans revolutionized production. While we built hundreds of perfect machines, they built thousands of good-enough machines. In modern war, good enough in overwhelming numbers beats perfection every time. The 300,000 aircraft they produced were not each superior to ours, but collectively they were invincible." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who commanded in Italy, offered a ground commander's perspective. "American aircraft made conventional military strategy impossible. We could not concentrate forces because they would be destroyed from the air. We could not move in daylight because of fighter bombers. We could not supply our troops because of interdiction. The Americans had achieved something we thought impossible. They had made air power decisive in land warfare through sheer numbers. This wasn't just a battle. It was a redefinition of warfare itself." Even Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who died before war's end, had recognized the reality. In his final letters, he wrote, "The Americans have achieved air superiority not through better aircraft or pilots, but through overwhelming numbers. They can lose 50 aircraft attacking one of our positions and consider it acceptable because they have thousands more. We cannot lose even one and remain effective. This is not warfare as we understand it. It is industrial mathematics, and the equation is impossible for us." The transformation of American society to achieve this production miracle was something Axis leaders never understood. While Germany used slave labor and Japan used forced labor, America used free workers, earning the highest wages in their history. While German factories were hidden and dispersed, American factories were celebrated and expanded. While German workers faced execution for sabotage, American workers competed for production bonuses. The social dynamics of democratic mobilization proved more powerful than authoritarian compulsion. It wasn't just about machines, it was about the spirit and organization of a free people. By war's end, American aircraft production had changed the nature of warfare itself. Air power had evolved from a supporting arm to a decisive force. The ability to project power globally through aircraft had made traditional concepts of front lines obsolete. The integration of air power with ground and naval forces had created combined arms warfare on a scale never before seen. All of this was made possible not by superior strategy or tactics, but by the mundane miracle of production. Factories running 3 shifts, workers setting production records, and assembly lines that never stopped. The legacy of American aircraft production extended far beyond military victory. The technologies developed for mass aircraft production revolutionized manufacturing. The aluminum industry, electronics industry, and precision tooling industry all emerged from the war transformed. The logistical systems created to support global aircraft operations became the foundation of modern supply chain management. The training systems developed to produce hundreds of thousands of pilots became the basis for modern technical education. The war had been won not just on battlefields, but in factories, and those factories had created the modern world we live in today. From commercial aviation to global logistics, the ripple effects are still felt. For the German generals, who had dismissed 300,000 American aircraft as propaganda, the post-war world was a daily reminder of their miscalculation. Every commercial airliner that flew overhead, every military transport supporting the Berlin airlift, every NATO fighter maintaining the peace was a descendant of the production miracle they had mocked. They lived in a world shaped by American air power, a world where the nation they had dismissed as weak had become the arsenal of democracy and the guardian of the skies. The story ends not with triumph, but with tragedy and a profound lesson. Millions died because Axis leaders refused to believe intelligence that contradicted their prejudices. Every German city destroyed by bombing. Every Japanese city incinerated by B-29s. Every soldier killed by aircraft they couldn't fight was a victim of leaders who had dismissed American aircraft production as propaganda. The 300,000 aircraft were not propaganda, but prophecy, a promise of industrial might that would reshape the world. Those who dismissed this promise as impossible learned too late that in modern war, production is strategy. Factories are weapons, and the nation that can build the most wins. The German generals who thought 300,000 American planes was propaganda had made the fatal error of confusing what they wished to be true with what was actually true. They had believed their own propaganda about American weakness while dismissing American strength as propaganda. They had let ideology override intelligence, prejudice override facts, and wishful thinking override reality. The price of this miscalculation was the destruction of their nations, the death of millions, and the end of their world. The 300,000 aircraft that buried them were not just machines, but manifestations of a truth they had refused to see. In the industrial age, the nation with the greatest productive capacity, not the finest military tradition, will ultimately prevail. This timeless lesson resonates far beyond the battlefields of World War II, serving as a stark reminder for leaders and innovators in every era. Dismiss inconvenient truths at your peril, for reality has a way of asserting itself, often with devastating consequences.